Torrential rain and high winds have battered the Philippines for the last 3 days.
Hundreds of families still require shelter, food, water and medical care.
How are you going to respond to this humanitarian disaster you are now being faced with?
Thousands of people have been affected.
3 missing. 3 missing.
In the meantime, you just need to make sure you are in a safe place.
The number of disasters worldwide is on the increase. Every year, more people are affected by emergencies caused by earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanoes. Humanitarian organizations are often the first to respond, working around the clock to deliver urgent medical assistance and aid where it is most needed. Speed and efficiency are crucial in the early struggle to save lives and to minimize human suffering.
When you are in a real emergency, it's very chaotic.
There are people dying, there are people in pain, there are children separated from parents, there's pressures from officials. To be able to help somebody be prepared to face that is an enormous challenge. As an organisation, are we competent? Are we capable?
What are the systems, the structures, the resources that you need to consider in an event of an emergency?
Who are you going to have to report to? Who do you have to communicate with? What are the risks? The logistics around moving your team, supporting your team, feeding your team. This is just to give you some triggers, some points of what we want you to achieve over the next few days.
The best way to test plans is to have a real event, but the second best is to actually simulate a disaster response.
Torrential rain and high winds gusting up to 140 kilometres per hour have battered the Philippines for the last 3 days. The storm is passing over the island of Panay, where infrastructure has been badly damaged and local communities are still waiting for assistance.
So there you have it, the news has just broken. I've got some further information that's available here. It sounds like some pretty terrible weather.
We're actually mimicking as close as we can what is a real situation. And it means that people get into role, they respond as they would for a real event, and it provides the strongest and most valuable learning experiences.
Some simulations are run in hotels, but the real emergency takes place where there's real people. Now, you can't do that in a hotel room.
The teams actually go into the field, they actually act as for real. They've got money that they've got to spend, it's for real time, it's in real communities, and it's based on a real event that happened, in actual fact, about 1 year ago in the same communities.
Get people in the communities role-playing and acting and reliving their experiences, and it's amazing the learning that takes place under those conditions.
No agency works in isolation. So by running an interagency exercise, we are providing a realistic environment.
They get to really see what it's like to work together with people that have completely different systems, but are really working towards the same goal.
The video that follows will explain and demonstrate how to plan, organize, run and evaluate a simulation field exercise. There are 5 steps in this process, referred to as the exercise cycle. Step 1 is to do the groundwork in preparation for the exercise. Step 2 is the development of the disaster event scenario and the supporting documentation for the exercise. Step 3 is implementation of the exercise. And step 4, the evaluation of the exercise. Step 5 is to capture all the learning from the exercise and make the necessary changes to plans, systems and procedures. Learning from the implementation of the exercise can then be carried forward to help plan further simulations.
Torrential rain and high winds have battered the Philippines for the last 3 days.
Hundreds of families still require shelter, food, water and medical care.
How are you going to respond to this humanitarian disaster you are now being faced with?
Thousands of people have been affected.
3 missing. 3 missing.
In the meantime, you just need to make sure you are in a safe place.
The first step in the exercise cycle is establishing the base, or the foundation for the simulation exercise. This involves planning activities. To initiate this process, a person with a practical understanding of simulation exercises is needed to promote and lead. The process of planning will often begin with the identification of a possible location in which a simulation could take place.
Maybe one up there and then somewhere up over here.
It is suggested that the proposed location meets a number of minimum criteria. To facilitate arrival, it should have an international airport which is reasonably cost-effective to fly to. The airport itself should be situated 2 to 3 hours' drive from the simulation site, and, as far as possible, it should be ascertained that the region offers a safe and secure environment in which to run a field exercise.
If we're going to choose a cyclonic storm as a scenario, there was a major cyclone that ran across that part of the island and ADRA responded. I think World Vision also responded, didn't they?
I think so.
Yeah.
If your agency has a working presence in that area, it is definitely an advantage.
There is trust already there. They know you, and therefore it's much easier to move forward from that basis to actually then work within that community where you are respected already.
We normally choose communities in which emergencies have happened, disasters have occurred within maybe 12 months, 2 years or something, and often those kind of memories are still there. They remember those events very, very clearly.
Now the benefits of that are that the community can actually identify with and respond appropriately to the actual scenario that has been set.
Once a possible location has been identified, it is necessary to gain authorization for running the simulation.
Within the organisation that I work for, I need to gain approval.
And then we'll go by road over the hills to a place called San Jose over here.
I need to make sure that the agency supports the concept of running a simulation.
If 2 or more organizations are partnering in the planning, it may be necessary for them to sign inter-agency agreements which outline their responsibilities and expected outcomes. Following this, it is beneficial to seek government support and approval for the simulation exercise. Depending on where it is held, who is involved, and government policies, this approval might be required anywhere from the national government level through to local government.
It is important to go right to the highest level, wherever possible, and talk to those people first. Now, the reason we do that is because that then opens up permissions in areas where we need resources to help us.
This is my father from ADRA. Nice to meet you.
In the Philippines, where we first approached the officials, they were very cold, and they basically just pushed us aside. Now, we were respectful, we listened, but we didn't take no for an answer, and we explained more detail. We shared some of the experiences that we had with other people in that community, and remarkably, that top official then turned right around and became extremely supportive, and all of the things which were problems before seemed to just evaporate.
For field-based simulation exercises, it is also essential to seek approval from the leaders of the host communities where the simulation exercise will be held. Keeping government and community leaders engaged and informed throughout the planning process is vital.
7 people times 60.
Once it is clear there is support for the simulation exercise, a budget should be developed and funding sought. The budget that is developed should include all the costs involved, from the initial planning and preparation through to implementation and the final evaluation and writing of the report.
Catalona Elementary School, yeah, at 2 p.m.
If they had an accident and we were treating them,
Central to the planning and preparations for a simulation exercise is the design team, led by the simulation director. This is a group of people who are representative of the key participating organisations, especially those that are committing resources and actively participating in the exercise. Members of the design team might include specialists relative to the simulation exercise focus areas, and an advisor that is familiar with the communities where the simulation exercise will be held.
It's extremely important that you look at people with skills, knowledge and experience, and it must be current in the area of emergency management. This is the team that actually pulls together the whole design of the scenario, the standards that are to be met, and they must be providing the correct information, the accurate information if we're to get the best results, the best outcomes for the people who are attending this simulation exercise.
The primary responsibilities of the design team are to determine the objectives for the simulation exercise, develop the initial scenario and a narrative of events that will unfold throughout the exercise, plan how the exercise will be implemented and managed, assist with the development of any pre-simulation materials, and advise throughout the process of exercise evaluation.
This is just put down developing cultural sensitivity.
Yep.
There we are, you can read.
Clearly defined objectives for the simulation exercise are essential.
How do they actually respond and how does the team pull together and work together?
How
Such objectives provide guidance and direction during the design phase and help to maintain focus during the implementation of the exercise. The initial scenario and unfolding narrative will all be based on the objectives. Objectives can be set at different levels, depending on the complexity of the simulation exercise. The higher level objectives will guide organizational development, and the more detailed training objectives will guide the specific development of emergency management staff. Once objectives have been identified, it is helpful to outline how performance will be evaluated relative to these objectives. The humanitarian sector has international standards such as the Red Cross Code of Conduct, SPHERE, and humanitarian accountability principles. These will all help in identifying the indicators of best practice expected from simulation participants. The final work in establishing the base is to identify key persons needed to implement the exercise effectively. Once the simulation starts, the design team's role will change and they will assume a simulation management function. It is the responsibility of the simulation management team to provide overall supervision and direction for the exercise, and, to facilitate this, a number of key responsibilities must be allocated in advance. It is always helpful to have at least one person identified as a liaison officer on this team. Their key responsibility will be maintaining a positive and beneficial relationship with the local community, as well as those in local authority. This person needs a good understanding of the local culture, as well as the political and social environment in which the exercise will be conducted. Personal linkages with influential people in the local community are always beneficial. As simulation exercises often involve many people working together under difficult and high-stress conditions, it is vital to have one individual identified as a security officer. This person will take care of all safety and security issues during the conducting of the exercise. Risks need to be identified in advance and appropriate contingency plans developed. Suitable emergency support institutions and personnel need to be identified up front, which the security officer can access when necessary. All of this research should be drawn together in a risk management plan, which will be covered in the next chapter of the video. There are extensive administrative and logistical issues that need to be addressed before and during a simulation exercise. To care for those needs, it is critical to identify a logistics officer who is backed up with appropriate support staff. Their work will include communicating and sharing information with participants and key stakeholders, documenting essential decisions and learnings, providing and maintaining equipment, and caring for accommodation and food needs. During the exercise itself, the simulation management team is supported by a vital group of people called monitors. These people are often sector or technical specialists. Their role is to observe the behavior of the participants and then provide feedback, facilitating maximum learning. As the monitors are not responsible for the mechanics of the exercise, they are free to focus on assessing the simulated response and on ensuring that training objectives are being met. The closer a simulation exercise is to reality, the more effective the learning for the participants. Role players need to be identified to help bring alive the events associated with the simulated scenario. These people could be monitors, simulation managers, community members, or officials. Finally, the participants themselves need to be carefully considered early in the planning phase. These people will actively participate in the exercise, implementing interventions in response to the unfolding scenario.
You've got to have the right people there. It should be people who are going to be working in that area in the future, so that you're going to be getting value from the investment that you're making. It's important that we get gender balance, that we also have some balance in ages as well. So there are dynamics that are brought into the team that are very important. It should be people who do have some previous experience to be able to add value as part of a team within the simulation exercise. Having said that, they don't need to be experts. What this is doing is helping their professional development and to improve and to further build on the skills that they have.
Torrential rain and high winds have battered the Philippines for the last 3 days.
Hundreds of families still require shelter, food, water and medical care.
How are you going to respond to this humanitarian disaster you are now being faced with?
Thousands of people have been affected.
3 missing. 3 missing.
For the the meantime, you just need to make sure you are in a safe place.
Before a simulation can begin, comprehensive plans need to be made detailing precisely how the scenario will unfold. A variety of documentation must also be drawn up to facilitate the smooth implementation of the exercise and to maximize learning opportunities. To help guide the development of the simulation, a scoping visit is essential. There is no substitute for a personal visit by design team members to the pre-selected site or sites. A scoping visit has three main benefits. First, to identify the physical venues to conduct training and provide accommodation. Secondly, to establish relationships with key stakeholders. And thirdly, to get a first-hand knowledge of the environment in which the simulation will be held. This information will help the design team to build all other aspects associated with the exercise within the budget allocated and in harmony with stated objectives. Maintaining good relationships with those in local government is crucial, and it will be beneficial to meet personally those in authority at a regional or district level.
Hello, I'm Robert from Adelaide, New Zealand. Here's my card.
Okay.
It's a pleasure to be able to actually meet you at last and really appreciate the time that you've made available. This is Michelle from World Vision.
Hello, I'm Michelle.
Useful relationships could be formed with police forces, community leaders, or local disaster coordinating bodies.
They're the ones who responded in the previous real emergencies. They know exactly the strengths in those communities and the weaknesses.
You're working with them to actually develop together the actual simulation exercise. And that can only be done by actually being there, seeing, talking to people, learning about that environment, learning about past disasters, so that the scenario that's developed is realistic and based on real events.
It is vital that the design team visit the actual location where the simulation is to be held, as this will help them to envisage how the simulation might unfold and the physical resources available to the participants.
And so where did the flooding actually come from? Directly from the river over there? The simulation director needs to be able to visualise, needs to understand the environment, to be able to picture that, to know all of the different variations and dynamics that may actually interact in the scenario that's being developed. In this village, how many people actually live there? Do you know what the population is?
Probably around 500 and around 120 households.
Okay.
The nature of the emergency and the specific location of the exercise are not revealed to participants prior to the exercise initiation. However, the scenario is a core element of the simulation and should be given careful consideration during the design process.
They are fishing for a living.
Yes,
And now
it's all gone, yeah.
At its broadest level, the emergency could take the form of an earthquake, a cyclone, a tsunami, or a man-made disaster. But crucially, the emergency should be one with which the local community are familiar.
these are all covered by water.
So literally over the top of your head then?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
But on the other houses, it's higher.
It's even higher.
The water
than
level
that.
is higher, yeah.
Wow. And so when this happened, where did you go?
Oh, we are trying to pour out water, but the water is come up too fast, and there's nothing we can do. We just go up higher, higher length.
Maintaining a level of realism with the scenario is critical, so that community members will be able to role-play with minimal effort, and participants will have a sense of reality throughout the simulation. Detailed factual information relevant to the scenario needs to be gathered during the scoping visit. This information will be used to develop fictional news releases, statements from government or UN bodies, and specific events within the scenario. The scenario should be of a nature that unfolds and changes over the duration of the exercise, as this mirrors the reality of a genuine response. Details on the scenario and associated events can be written up as a narrative to guide the management team.
So we're going to Manila, and then have a domestic flight all the way to Iloilo. Yeah.
And the regular flights every day?
Yes.
At the end of a scoping visit, it is beneficial for the design team to review their findings immediately and begin to apply them to the overall design of the simulation.
It's critical that we have that information all laid out as we finalize the design of the scenario. So more or less we would know not only the different events that happen, but also critical roles that we need to consider in making that scenario happen.
Including some confusing elements and diversions is always useful. Throughout the exercise, messages called injects are used to communicate specific events to participants, which will require their action in some form or another. Building surprising but plausible events relative to the training objectives is critical to the effectiveness of the exercise.
They're often based on real experiences, so that when they happen, people can actually identify with them. They are believable, and therefore people will respond in a more appropriate way.
Most injects will be prepared in advance and scheduled. However, space needs to be allowed for spontaneous injects to be used, as the management team and monitors observe helpful learning opportunities relative to the way participants and community members respond to the unfolding events. A variety of documentation needs to be developed for the benefit of both management team and the participants. For the management team, this includes an exercise schedule and exercise control plan. The exercise schedule is a work plan outlining key activities from the inception of the idea for an exercise through to the evaluation of the exercise after it is completed. The exercise schedule clearly identifies who needs to do what and by what time. It is the responsibility of the simulation director to oversee and manage this work plan with support from their deputy and the simulation administrator. The exercise control plan is the management's nerve center for all activities associated with the implementation of the actual exercise. This plan is not revealed to participants, but is vital for all personnel involved in conducting the exercise, including monitors and role players. The control plan details all the procedures, responsibilities, communication, logistics, and administrative structures in place to support control and direction of the simulated event during the exercise. It is an elaborate plan that provides instruction and detail for the exercise, much in the same way as a script for a play. Detailed within the control plan are the expected standards that participants should reach. These standards provide a valuable tool to enable monitors to advise and mentor participants in a consistent way. Documentation for participants will include pre-exercise and exercise-specific information. Where a formal training component is associated with the simulation, a pre-exercise workbook is beneficial and should be given to participants prior to arrival. This will be tailor-made to suit the training, but helpful content will include background information on the country in which the exercise will take place, information on key agencies involved, tips on stress management, summaries of international humanitarian standards, and items for a grab bag. The participant handbook, for use during the simulation, needs to be of a type that information can be added to it during the course of the exercise. Contents of this will include explanatory material about simulations, expectations on participants, logistics information, health and safety and security alerts, key contact numbers, exercise schedule including briefing times, and the scenario narrative. Associated news and sit reps can be added as the simulated emergency unfolds. The risk management plan is relevant to the simulation management team, monitors, and participants. At all times during the simulation exercise, it is imperative that the health and safety of all personnel involved is taken seriously. Forethought needs to be given to all critical hazards that could potentially impact the exercise and what their likely impact would be. Associated risk reduction activities should be identified and documented. Every individual associated with the exercise has a responsibility to manage risk.
Torrential rain and high winds have battered the Philippines for the last 3 days.
Hundreds of families still require shelter, food, water and medical care.
How are you going to respond to this humanitarian disaster you are now being faced with?
Thousands of people have been affected.
3 missing. 3 missing.
In the meantime, you just need to make sure you are in a safe place.
Real disasters always have an element of surprise. They usually happen with little or no warning and often catch people unprepared. As much as possible, an exercise should endeavour to simulate this, creating as realistic an environment as possible. Although participants will know a simulated disaster is about to happen, it is preferable they have no prior knowledge of the nature of the emergency, where it will be, or what the impact is.
Team leader for World Vision, team leader for ADRA. Your team is all here, accounted for, present. We're in Iloilo City on the island of Panay in the Philippines, and we've brought together 2 response teams. They've come from around the Asia region, as far north as Mongolia, as far west as Indonesia, and as far east as the Philippines. Let's have open communication.
Prior to the simulation, it is recommended that the participating disaster response teams are gathered at a meeting room or similar venue about 2 or 3 hours drive from the actual simulation exercise site.
Okay, let's continue to go down the list here.
In some cases, it will be beneficial to conduct some classroom training at this venue, establishing some foundational principles and key skills that will be useful to participants once the simulation has begun.
I understand that we've actually got some breaking news. Just a minute.
First notification of the disaster scenario should be communicated in a fashion that could be expected in reality.
Good evening, this is Ashley from WNS. Torrential rain and high winds gusting up to 140 kilometres per hour have battered the Philippines for the last 3 days. The storm is passing over the island of Panay, where infrastructure has been badly damaged and local communities are still waiting for assistance.
So there you have it. The news is just broken. I've got some further information that's available here. It sounds like it's been pretty terrible weather. How are you going to actually respond to this humanitarian disaster you are now being faced with? Suddenly they've got all this information and it's like the real event where they're overwhelmed. Everything has to be done at once and there's just frenetic activity.
Okay, we can spread into two groups together with you guys.
Once the disaster scenario has been initiated, the teams are expected to contact key organisations as they would in a real event to obtain more information. The control plan will identify who should be contacted, thereby setting the standard.
Typhoon Frank, that's it. It passed through Iloilo.
All key organisations will have been briefed in detail during the exercise development phase to ensure that they are able to respond appropriately. Predetermined injects of information should be communicated to the participating teams in response to their requests.
The urgent expressed and the need for shelter, food, water and medical kits.
Once the teams have completed some assessment of the situation and gathered more information, it is expected they will respond as if it were a real event. This will include following their organization's protocols to determine if and how they will respond.
How much logistics and security is needed, how much is the HR is needed, especially staff care, what are the things you need?
Following this, an expected behavior would be the development of a plan that incorporates coordination, communication, security and logistic considerations, all within the context of the given scenario.
We then give them actual resources. Okay, we'll give them a kitty of so much money, and it could be $1,000 that they then have to use to do all of the things which they need. That would involve going out, renting a vehicle to get to the site where the emergency has been set. It would involve buying their own food, paying for their accommodation. They're totally on their own. Once the scenario is set, they go out into the field and they actually act as if they are managing completely.
And thank you for coming. Because of the typhoon, we are now code red, meaning we are in full alert.
From this point forward to the end of the exercise, injects of information, messages, occurrences and events are provided to further support and expand the initial scenario.
Breakaway force of the
These injects must be realistic and designed to meet the objectives of the exercise. Participants are expected to respond to these injects as they would in a real situation.
Everybody meet on the road. Meet on the road by the gate. We'll do a head count outside the gate.
I'm in the village of Catalan in Antigua province, and as you've said already, thousands of people have been affected by this terrible flooding. Efren, tell us a little bit about what you've seen over the last few hours.
We saw immediately the village had this rope and they were crossing the flash flood. It was devastating because you see old women, about 60 years old and above, hanging on the ropes. And we were assisting them and we saw children and most of them were crying.
Now you've got over 100 people here in this evacuation center. How are you helping them?
As of now, we are managing the evacuation center. We're using the classrooms and now we are working on providing them food and water.
Well, thank you, Ephraim, for telling us about the latest situation in Catalona village. Back to you, Anika Schubert, in CNN Atlanta headquarters.
Throughout the simulation, role players, who have been identified in advance, will act to bring a further sense of reality to the unfolding scenario.
In their house. Three missing.
The main focus today has been establishing this school as a welfare centre to actually host and look after those people, those 100 people or so, over for the next month. But they'll be working with the local community to do that.
Simulation monitors continually observe participants for their responses, actions and interactions, and compare these to the standards detailed in the control plan. Using their judgment, they might choose to provide advice and instruction at the time, or, more commonly, withhold advice for feedback during the debrief sessions.
The capacity assessment was actually quite good. They've assessed the floor area, they've assessed how much population they have, and they've got it quite right. About 2/3 they could quite easily accommodate using spare standards. The things they have missed though is water and sanitation. That's been completely off the radar. One toilet that's completely locked up, and one toilet that hasn't been used for several years.
A role of a monitor is not just to be a policeman. Okay, they can actually have a mentoring role through the process, but again, making the judgment not to jump into a situation and tell the participants what they should be doing. They should wait until participants come and ask. And they may not necessarily give the answer, they may ask another question.
It's very good. What about child protection in relation to food and shelter and things like that? How does World Vision see that?
They're trying there to put the participants into a situation where they have to think, where they are close to reality, they're not being handheld, that they're having opportunities to think deeply, to interact with each other, to ask questions and so on.
Okay.
That's an accelerated learning opportunity.
During the simulation, it is beneficial to imitate the numerous interactions which take place with external agencies, local authorities and support offices in the event of a real emergency response.
All right, no problem.
In order to facilitate this, a physical coordination cell should be established, which is staffed by a small number of simulation monitors.
They didn't say it was internal or external. Press release.
That coordinating cell may be in a school building, it may be in somebody's house. It needs to be somewhere where you've got internet access, you've got power.
So you want to know what's been happening at the evacuation centre?
To actually interact by phone, by internet, by email. We set up Gmail accounts and so on, and we then respond in real time to those emails coming in, and we manage it through this coordinating cell.
We're out of simulation for the next 15-20 minutes, all right? This is a briefing for you.
It is advised that once a day the exercise is halted and participants come out of role for a briefing. This gives an opportunity for the simulation director to provide information and advice that is relevant to everyone, and to listen to any concerns or challenges that the participants might be facing.
If there's anything you want to discuss, remember you can with your team leaders and with any other monitors as well.
Pains here. Pain. She told me this morning she feels pain. She feels like she would vomit.
Although a control plan has been developed, and the scenario and injects are designed to control and direct the exercise, it must always be remembered that to a certain extent an exercise can take on a life of its own, as individuals, team dynamics and the host communities add to the reality of the situation. For this reason, it is crucial that the simulation management team remain aware of how the response is progressing and are able to adapt the unfolding scenario as necessary.
So that, there is sort of a bigger picture, but then providing the specific information to each agency as well.
You don't want to be just totally dependent upon prepared injects, because you want to be able to have the freedom to take advantage of what might happen.
We don't know what the participants will do, or how will they respond, or how will the community react to it. So we have to be really flexible, and that's where your ingenuity, your creativity will come.
We've just designed a separate inject. We've actually got Mike over behind the stage. He's had some head injuries and he's actually knocked unconscious.
As new and unexpected situations occur throughout the exercise, it may be appropriate for the simulation management team to add, amend, or remove injects from the exercise schedule. Monitors should also be free to suggest changes which may promote additional learning.
We've lost one of our team member, and we're trying to find him.
Some people would start from that point.
Some of those ideas are really, really helpful. Some of those ideas have to be thought through very carefully so that you then don't lose the core purpose of the learning.
Let's go. Gregson! Marks and Gregson!
Did you hear me, Mike?
You've got to keep on coming back to your objectives.
Where's the first aid kit?
Why are we doing this simulation? What are the different aspects within a response that we want to test?
Do you have medical details to go with them? Get details for him for the ambulance?
So that you can get a good balance and put learning as the number one thing.
Torrential rain and high winds have battered the Philippines for the last 3 days.
Hundreds of families still require shelter, food, water and medical care.
How are you going to respond to this humanitarian disaster you are now being faced with?
Thousands of people have been affected.
3 missing. 3 missing.
In the meantime, you just need to make sure you are in a safe place.
All the monitors and observers, if we can just have you over here.
To facilitate continuous learning, a scheduled hot debrief should be held each evening. This allows participants and monitors to share experiences and observations, consolidating learning on a daily basis.
You guys done a fantastic job today. You've been through heaps. You've still...
To promote informality and inclusion, participants are seated in a circle along with the simulation management team and monitors.
We first of all go around the group and we ask them to share what were powerful learning experiences for them. What might they do differently next time?
The areas of improvement, things which they could have done better, we let them get the negatives off their chest first. It's amazing how that generates depth of learning. It generates new perspectives because maybe one person didn't see it as another person saw it.
He was just very composed and thoughtful.
We then follow that by a round of what worked really well. What can you actually celebrate? What were fantastic things that were done today?
By the time you've gone around the circle again, all of that tension which was built up when they were talking about the challenges and the improvements, you sense that just goes.
She thought it was a wrong spelling.
It should be mango, knowing the Philippines is a mango.
They're excited, they want to get out there, they want to go back into the simulation, they want to improve. You sense that they're starting to think about new ideas, learning is starting to take place.
A concluding simulation exercise debrief should be held on the final day of the exercise.
I'd like you to think about 3 things to celebrate. What are 3 things that you think went pretty well with your team, with the way in which you functioned as a group? Okay, go for it.
This will be conducted in a similar fashion to the hot debriefs, but will capture and collate all the learning experiences that have emerged during the simulation.
The biggest celebration is to have completed the SimEx exercise.
These should be comprehensively documented and supplied to participants for future reference. After the exercise has finished and all the participants have left to return to their respective offices, it is recommended that the design team meet in order to assess and evaluate the entire simulation development and implementation process.
One of the things that came up a few different times in a few different ways was that there wasn't enough feedback from monitors to participants during the actual exercise. So if we can maybe find all of the comments that relate to that particular point, we're going to try and group some of these comments and some of this feedback.
Good strategies to stretch us.
It is important that both successes and shortcomings are well documented so that learning can be incorporated into future simulations. This ensures a process of continual quality improvement.
Torrential rain and high winds have battered the Philippines for the last 3 days.
Hundreds of families still require shelter, food, water and medical care.
How are you going to respond to this humanitarian disaster you are now being faced with?
Thousands of people have been affected.
3 missing. 3 missing.
In the meantime, you just need to make sure you are in a safe place.
Disasters are enormously traumatic events for people, and when we run a simulation, we bring a lot of those memories back into the people's minds. Now, we have to be extremely careful.
It's quite fresh for them, so it's important that you are sensitive to the environment, sensitive to the well-being of the community.
Following the simulation exercise, it is of crucial importance that the local community are appropriately debriefed. This will not only help them to process the events of the exercise, but will enable them to be better prepared for emergencies in the future.
People can actually move forward beyond those traumatic events if they have an opportunity to sit down in a trusting environment, in an environment where people respect them. In the Philippines, we got the community together, talked to them about the different things which had happened during the emergency, and then let them walk around the village and identify things which may help to prevent future disasters.
Stones there stop you slipping. You might want to think about making it go longer. So that it's easier for people to run over to your shelter.
Yeah.
Simple things, little things
can help.
Yeah,
Can help people.
yeah, and you've started already.
Yes.
So the community have been feeling about their ideas initially that they've picked up as they walk around about ways that the community is safer, and we've set those up according to different themes. So there's water and food, shelter, social networks, livelihoods, and so on. And now we're just helping them think beyond the level where we've been at by just doing the sort of the visual walk around the village. If you're not sure if your water is safe to drink, what different ways can you use to sterilise the water? If the sun is strong, then one day in the sun and it's safe. It works even better if you have a black colour underneath.
We got them off thinking about the negative things to think about the positive things that they could do. And I think that was probably one of the best things that we could have ever done for them.
The whole process, I say, it's very helpful because the community was really involved in the how they express themselves. The ideas just came out from them, especially the children. I was really also amazed how they explain. I think they have already a good understanding of disaster management program, and I think it will also lessen or make my task easier to implement the disaster program, particularly in risk reduction.
The simulation exercise is not just testing the competencies or the skills of the participants.
We're there to try and help build skills, there's no question about that. But the primary focus in running a simulation is testing systems, testing plans.
We can also add the local NGO.
Yes.
Yeah.
And maybe on another mind map that we do the breakdown.
Yeah.
Okay, what are we going to say? We're trying to get a sense of whether really as an organisation are we competent, are we capable?
The principle is not so much what is the emergency, but it's more about how is an organisation prepared, how are they going to respond to the given emergency.
Hi Rebecca.
Hey, hi.
Hello. Hi, how are you doing?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
The learning that was documented during the final debrief must be incorporated into updated response plans and systems.
Okay. And I'm still working on some of the objectives. I'll put the rationale, but it needs to be more concise.
To do that is something which needs to be budgeted for, needs to be resourced, I think, right up front as you're planning for the simulation. Writing it down helps us as a group to think more clearly, more specifically. And we will be involving more and more now people with expertise in managing learning and managing documentation processes, having people allocated, identified, and not just added sort of at the last minute.
There is an investment that has been made for the running of the simulation, and we want to ensure that we will get long-term value from that investment. Okay, one. Yeah!